Hello everyone, welcome to today's webinar. We'll wait for a few more seconds and allow more people to join, then we get started. Make yourself comfortable, grab a glass of water, a sandwich, a cup of coffee or tea. Sit back and get ready for an amazing session ahead. I hope you're enjoying these webinars that we've been running lately and you're continuing to engage with CIPS through the different channel, being our website, our YouTube channel, our social media. Please interact with us. We'd love to hear your thoughts around the sessions that we put on, the content that we go through. So please send us your feedback and do so as well through the chat box in this very webinar. Just wait a few more minutes before we get started. I can see the number of attendees rising up. Given it's lunchtime, you will be getting ready for the little break. And what a great opportunity to spend lunch break and learning about some amazing stuff that are going on in our community. Okay, that's brilliant. Welcome again, everyone. Kia ora. My name is Giovanni Ferrante. I am the marketing manager for CIPS in the Australian and New Zealand region. My pleasure to be your host for today. Just a reminder, this is part of our Best in Procurement webinar series, a series of webinars aimed at showcasing examples of procurement excellence from our very own region. This webinar is being recorded and we will make it available to view it after the fact. We will in fact send an email to all those that have registered with a link to check the recordings, which will be available on YouTube channel. So I encourage you to look anyway, because there's plenty of content, interview, opinion pieces. So check out our YouTube channel. Just go on YouTube and type the Chartered Institute of Procurement and Supply, and you can find a lot of useful content in there. As per usual, you have an opportunity to interact with attendees and with the panelists through the chat box and the Q&A. Please do so, and encourage you to tell us where you're from, what you're hoping to learn from this session, and start thinking about the questions that you might want to ask our presenter. So today, before we get into the nitty-gritty of our session, I would like, as per tradition, as per the right thing to do, acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which I'm sitting today. It is Aboriginal land. It always was, and it always will be. I am sitting currently on the land that belonged to the Wurundjeri, Woiwurrung and Boonwurrung peoples, the Kulin Nation, and I'd like to pay my respects to the past, present and elders, and acknowledge all the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people present today. I'd also like to extend my respect to our New Zealand colleagues as well. So Tina Koto, Tina Koto, Tina Koto Katoa. Today's session is about supplier diversity, a category that recognizes diversity excellence. This is for organizations that have implemented successful supplier diversity projects and have unlocked innovation and strategic business results, as well as opening up opportunities for those that are diverse in size, ownership, or mission. The presenter for today is Jennifer Browne, the Chief Financial Officer for the Department of Child Protection in South Australia. And to tell you a little bit about their project, which was titled Partnering with Aboriginal Businesses, I'd like to share some of the highlights that the judges have pulled together as a commendation for their outstanding achievement. So the Department for Child Protection, or DCP, specifically acknowledged the overrepresentation of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander children within its system. And because of that, the department made a commitment to increase commercial relationships with Aboriginal community-controlled organisations to spend at least 0.5% of its total spend in 2018 and 19 financial year. However, given the vital cultural work performed by the department, particularly to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders children, the agency quickly made the decision to increase its commitment to 3% of spend. And procurement methodologies were added to encourage participation of Aboriginal community control organisation, including selective tendering and dialogues to reduce the traditional burden or competitive aspect of the tender process. So as a result of the 2018 and 19 financial year, 5.6% of the total spend actually went to those organisations, exceeding the target by 3%. So consequently, DCP has increased its future spend target, aiming to achieve 6% in 2021 financial year and 7% for the next year. So what an amazing commitment. The majority of spends represent frontline services for children and for youngsters, as well as services supporting the department's corporate operation. They've built many successful commercial relationship with ACCOs, which are hoped to lead to increased opportunity for those businesses and better outcomes for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Island children. So without any further ado, there was a quick snapshot summary of the excellent project presented by the Department for Child Protection. So without any further ado, I'd like to first of all thank Jennifer for making herself available. I'll invite you to join us, Jennifer, and over to you to walk us through your project.
Thanks, Giovanni. That was an excellent summary, I have to say. Just checking that everyone can see the presentation.
Yes, we can. Perfect. Yep, we can see the slide, Jennifer. You're good to go.
Yeah, I'm just struggling to see at my end. Hold on.
It's okay. In the meantime, continue to tell us where you're dialing in from. If from the brief snapshot that I've just gone through have already thought about some questions that you can ask Jennifer, please do so. You have the Q&A function to submit all of the questions for Jennifer. Also, what it is helpful for us is to understand what your learning outcomes are. It will help us guide particularly the Q&A and hopefully give some recommendation and advices to all of you in attendance on how yourself from your end can help improve supplier diversity within your own business. If we're getting there with sorting the technical issues, I can see presentation up on screen. Hopefully Jennifer will be able to see it at her end.
Yeah, okay, great. Thanks very much, Giovanni. So, and thank you to CIPS for the recognition of this award. It was really fantastic to be included. I would also like to acknowledge the traditional owners and cultural authorities of the lands that we all virtually meet on today. And in particular, I'd like to acknowledge the Kaurna people as the traditional owners of the land that I'm on today. I just wanted to give a little bit of background around child protection, because from a procurement perspective, it does have, sort of own unique challenges and issues. So for child protection, about 50% of the work that child protection does in South Australia is actually outsourced, and the majority of that work is outsourced to the not-for-profit sector. I guess the unfortunate reality for us is we have about over 4,000 young people in our care, and a large component of the the procurement that we do is actually the purchasing of homes and therapeutic care for young people. So that might be a foster care placement, or it might be a therapeutic residential care placement, but is a really, really significant component of our business. And to put it sort of into perspective from a dollar value, by the end of this financial year, we anticipate that we will have about $1 billion worth of contracts under our management. So quite significant procurement activity for us. So I came into the organisation back in 2017 after the Royal Commission. I know that a number of states have had Royal Commissions into child protection services, and South Australia was definitely included in that group. So at that time when I came into the organisation, there was a lot of unhappiness across the board, that there was definitely some unhappiness from our Aboriginal communities. The sector that was delivering the services had issues with the way we were procuring services. The government weren't completely happy either. They weren't convinced that what we were doing was meeting children's needs. And we were also, at that time, had the highest cost per placement for a young person. I think we were second highest in the country at the time. So we had significant financial pressures, and we couldn't really say that we were meeting all the needs of our young people. So the work that I'm talking about today actually formed a broader reform piece into procurement reform that we were doing. The unfortunate reality for us is that Aboriginal children are overrepresented. They represent about a third of our young people in care. And to put that into perspective, I think from a South Australian population perspective, Aboriginal people represent, I think it's about under 5%. So pretty significant overrepresentation. And I guess the other reality for us is that young people are continuing to come into care. So we are seeing increases of young people coming into care of between about 7 to 9% per annum. So this is an area of growing need. So to say that we needed to put some focus into the procurement of services from Aboriginal controlled organisations is an understatement. It was an area that we absolutely needed to put our urgent attention to, and was really the catalyst for some of the things I'm going to talk about today.
Jennifer, sorry to interrupt quickly. Would you be able to turn your video on by any chance so that people can see you?
Sure. Yes.
Brilliant.
We weren't sure if that was what was causing the technical issues or not. So what we embarked on quite a significant reform piece for our contracting, and we knew that we were going to need to procure things very differently, and we wanted to give very clear signals to the sector about what our intention was right from the very beginning. So what we did is we hired out one of the large hotels in Adelaide and conducted an industry day where we invited providers both locally and across the country to come and talk to us and hear from us around what our intention was in terms of our procurement agenda moving forward. And on this day, I wanted to give really clear signals to the sector about what our focus was going to be moving forward. And two of the big key themes out of that day were Aboriginal children, that our intention was to increase our expenditure in that area, and that our intention was to support and grow Aboriginal controlled entities. And the other area, which we're not going to cover today, but was also disability services as well. A third of our young people also have disabilities and the full spectrum of disabilities. So they were definitely the two themes from the day that we definitely wanted to signal to the sector. I'm a big believer in allowing the sector long lead times in order to pivot their businesses in the direction that you want. We are talking very large sums of money, and we were giving very clear signals that that money is potentially shifting in a different direction. So the longer lead time that I can give the sector, I think the better. We were very deliberate in our keynote speakers, that there was a very deliberate focus from Aboriginal organisations, and we had fantastic feedback, not just from our Aboriginal controlled organisation people in the room, but also the non-Aboriginal organisations were also really got a lot out of the presenters. So we had Dr. Gerald Featherstone from an Aboriginal controlled entity in Queensland. So Gerald has done a lot of work on partnerships and partnering with non-Aboriginal entities. So he really talked about that collaboration and the work and the development that his Aboriginal controlled entity had done. So that was really great for people on that day to hear a lived experience about an organisation that had grown and developed and were achieving really amazing outcomes for young people. And we also had Natalie Lewis, who represents the Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander peak group in Queensland. So they were fantastic speakers. And again, Natalie talked about growing the sector, improving therapeutic outcomes for young people, and had lots of really great insights. So we were very deliberate right from the very beginning of this journey about communicating to the sector about what our intention was moving forward. I just wanted to show you this piece of artwork, probably something that's you're not always thinking about when you're looking at procurement reform. But for us, this artwork was a real game changer. It was a piece of artwork that was commissioned by our Aboriginal practice area. And if you told me the impact that this artwork was going to have at the beginning of this journey, I just would not have believed it. It's just had such an amazing impact and has just been pivotal in assisting us to communicate right through this journey. And I guess at the heart of Aboriginal culture, storytelling is an important component, and this piece absolutely does that. So DCP partnered with a local artist, Elizabeth Close. Those of you that are into art, she's definitely one to watch. She's up and coming, an amazing artist in South Australia. So the artwork depicts the journey that DCP is undertaking towards improving outcomes for Aboriginal children and young people. So each image represents an element of the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander placement principles, and most importantly, being at the centre is identification. So that's, for us, the child is always at the centre of our decision making. So these principles are what guide us and assist us with design and delivery and review of services, both internally and externally, the services that we're contracting. So each element is as important as each other and needs to be considered collectively. And it's all linked together by a thread. So the circles and the lines all link together to sort of depict the journey of the child and the young person while in care. So in terms of specifics around the things that we did from a procurement perspective, Giovanni touched on this at the beginning. We were very deliberate right up front that we were going to set targets. So the South Australian government has a target of 0.5% for all government departments in terms of their target for total procurement expenditure on an annual basis. But given our overrepresentation, that we did consider that that target wasn't high enough. And I guess, our belief is that our, end goal should be the equivalent of what our representation of young people is in care. So our plan is to keep stretching this target each year. So we created a policy, and it is a policy that the rest of government has been looking at. I get often asked to share this policy. But it's basically saying to the organisation that we're going to be really deliberate in our approach to the market and sets out key targets. So for this current year, we did set the target at 6%, but I think we've already achieved that, and I'll show that a little bit in the next slide. From a procurement innovation perspective, every time we had a service that needed to be procured, we really did have a look at it and reflect, how could we do this differently, and how could we meet the cultural needs of young people through that process. So different services, we took different approaches. So we've really done quite a spectrum of approaches to the market. So Giovanni touched on the fact that we did do competitive dialogue. So we did go out with a pilot project around Aboriginal family group conferencing. This did attract a lot of interest from the market, which was great. And the approach that we took to that one was a competitive dialogue. So it did enable us to sort of break down some of those barriers and hear the innovations and the ideas that our Aboriginal controlled organisations had in relation to that particular submission. We've also done select tenders where we've actually deliberately bundled pieces of work and only made them available to Aboriginal controlled entities. So that's definitely created some new opportunities. As part of some of that, where we knew that we had new and emerging organisations, we did offer seed funding. It's not always easy to do that in every situation, but we have been able to do that where, particularly for we've had some long established Aboriginal entities, but where we had some new entities which we were trying to encourage growth, we did offer seed funding. We also looked at all of our procurements and completely changed our requirements around cultural responsiveness. So we increased the weights in all of our procurements around cultural responsiveness in terms of selection criteria. So obviously that gave an advantage to Aboriginal controlled entities, but it also sent a clear message to our non-Aboriginal entities that they definitely had to lift their game and have a focus also on cultural responsiveness for young people as part of that process. The other area that we absolutely encouraged is we encouraged, particularly for our newer Aboriginal entities, was to partner with non-Aboriginal well-established entities. And we've had some really great outcomes that we have had some procurements where we've had a number of joint tendering submissions that have gone on. One thing we do ask for, however, as part of that is that the Aboriginal entity is the lead tenderer, that we do ask for that as part of that process. So those things have definitely had an impact as I guess a collective piece. As part of all of our procurements, we've had a really strong focus on engagement with the sector. So we do lots of pre-tender briefings. We do briefings within tenders that we've increased our dialogue with our sector considerably. Again, trying to give providers long lead times, trying to give really clear signals to the sector about the areas that we want to change and the areas that we want to do better in. A lot of our reform has actually been about the department doing better. So it's been about communicating to the sector about the things that we're doing in-house to be more responsive and more focused as well, not just our providers. So we do hold regular events, and that's been a really important part of our journey. We also created a designated service provider web presence. This has also been really important for new providers. So we effectively publish all of our contracting content. So if you are a new provider and you're thinking that you might like to provide a service for child protection, you could go onto our website now and find all of the service requirements. And that helps providers to get themselves ready, to look at their own organisations, to look at where they need to grow and develop. So again, really trying to support the sector there. The other thing that we've done is we've partnered with, South Australia has an Office for Industry Advocates, and what this office does is it provides independent training and partnership for organisations that are interested in doing business with government. So not just child protection. And I guess what that group has enabled for us is to provide support and guidance in how to actually do a tender and prepare a tender and bid for work with government, but keep that at arm's length from us, because we still do need to provide, I guess, that commercial arm's length approach to the market. So the Office for Industry Advocate has been fantastic in supporting us to support our Aboriginal entities to get ready for that sort of competitive dialogue. So in terms of how have we done, so I'm really pleased to report that from last financial year, we had a target of 5% and we've already delivered 6.4%. So we did have a target for this current year of 6%, but we've already delivered it last year. So we are going to up our target again. So constantly looking to stretch that target, and we do have a number of contracting bids in the market at the moment. So I'm really confident that we will be able to continue to exceed those numbers. And at the moment, we haven't got the numbers yet for the financial year just gone, but the previous year our work was about 24% or a quarter of the whole of the South Australian government spend with Aboriginal businesses. So our goal is to keep exceeding that target. So that's the end of my formal presentation. I would just like to acknowledge before we sort of go into questions, I'd love to acknowledge my amazing team. This has been a really large piece of work over a number of years for us. And I have a absolutely fantastic group of people that support me to do this work. So I would just like to acknowledge them as well.
Jennifer, thank you very much. That was a brilliant presentation. A lot of insights. I've personally taken a lot of notes. I encourage everyone who's with us today to ask as many questions as possible, get inspiration, get some tips from Jennifer to try and implement in your own organisation. Just to get the ball rolling, there's a question I'd like to ask. How did you know who to engage with, how to get in touch with, potential Aboriginal community control organisation that might want to deliver services for the organisation, for the department?
Yeah, that's a great question, because that was definitely, being new into this sector, getting to know our providers was a really important part of that, and was part of the reason why we wanted to do the industry day, is that we wanted to make sure we knew who was out there and who was interested. So that really was pivotal, because people registered that were interested. So we had a list of organisations, And then we did, we had informal meetings with a number of those organisations, because what we needed to do was understand what was out there, but also understand where their strengths were and where we thought that they would match to the services that we were needing. So we were quite deliberate in, I guess, that very deliberate going out and finding out who they are. The Office of the Industry Advocate does keep a register in South Australia of all Aboriginal controlled entities. So we did also draw on their experience and their details. And we've also got an amazing Aboriginal practice group internally that also knew a lot of people already and could, I guess, independently also tell me who they thought would be good at providing what types of services, so that we could, I guess, tailor our approaches based on the maturity of the market. So they've been our Aboriginal group. I have to acknowledge the director, Tracy Rigney. She's been a fantastic partner for us in all of the work that we've been doing, and very much has been working alongside of us and guiding us through that process.
Thank you, Jennifer. There's an anonymous question that came through. It says, it has been mentioned that the agency has only approached the Aboriginal Community Control Organisation for certain tenders. Are you able to explain how that was done without breaching the Racial Discrimination Act? I think that from what I understood, obviously you selected the areas that you wanted to target a particular business because they were linked to the areas of spend that you were able to meet those service requirements for those businesses, but I'll let you answer that in more detail if you wish.
Yeah, so we did have to create a case for that. So the area that we chose to do that was kinship care. So kinship care is where a family member or relative is caring for a young person. So, and I guess part of our rationale for this one is that evidence does show that young people and families, Aboriginal young people and families, do better generally when they are supported by an Aboriginal controlled entity. So we did put forward a case to the government. We do have that within our procurement rules. There is that proactive approach within our rules that we are able to do that without actually being seen as discriminatory. So we've run that as a pilot project, and that one was Aboriginal entities only that were able to bid for that.
Brilliant. Hopefully that clarifies.
Yeah, so we that in that particular tender, we've got one well-established Aboriginal entity that has been a key partner of ours for quite a long time. So they were very successful in their own right. And then we also, that was one of the ones where we got 2 consortium bids, where we basically got well-established non-Aboriginal organisations supporting some, I guess, some emerging organisations, which for us was a really fantastic outcome, and it was what we were hoping for. So it was really great to see our non-Aboriginal entities step up and support our emerging entities. It was really pleasing to see from the market.
It's brilliant. Peter Mackey is asking a question. What services did you focus on, and were they aligned with Supply Nation by any chance?
Yeah, there definitely is an alignment. So for us, the services that we were really focusing on was young people in care. That we want, wherever possible, supporting the Aboriginal placement principle. What we wanted to do was have them cared for and supported by an Aboriginal controlled entity. So there's a full spectrum of that, and there's a broad range of complexities and needs of our young people. So what we were quite deliberate is trying to match the needs of our young people with the strengths of the different organisations. The other area that we also wanted to have a particular focus with was around supporting families more broadly, and that's where the family group conferencing work came into play.
Perfect. And Jedrick is asking, how did you identify what were the best areas of spend to focus on? you touched on that already, but was there any particular criteria?
Yeah, I've touched on it a little bit. Part of it was driven by procurement cycle. That one of, based on, I guess, our broader reform piece is that we were trying to go to the market with like type services in bundles, which the organisation previously hadn't done. So we had quite a deliberate recommissioning piece across all of our services that we were systematically working through. So we really did it, I guess, the other way, that we said, right, this is the services that we are going to be re-tendering based on this cycle of work. And what we did is we reflected and looked at all of those pieces and said, how can we do better for children in this process? And that meant, how can we do better for Aboriginal children? How can we do better for children with disabilities? And how can we do better for children therapeutically? So they were the things that we looked at and obviously because of our overrepresentation, that looking in and leaning at how well we were supporting Aboriginal children came up in every procurement that we were doing.
Awesome. Sebastian is asking an interesting question. Have we considered setting the procurement targets in terms of the number of contracts awarded versus the actual spend? If so, is there a benefit for the department to choose one over the other? So a number of contract versus total spend.
We basically we use the expenditure target because that's the target set by government. So that's the measure of my performance. So that was partly. Obviously, number of contracts is also important, and we do track that internally. But I guess if you talk to organisations, it's often money is the forefront rather than numbers of contracts. It's how much money and how much work am I winning rather than a number of contracts. But I think both are important KPIs.
And this is just a follow-up question from myself. Do you measure any sort of like follow-up effect or impact that you've had on the businesses that support this process, the Aboriginal controlled businesses that support this process, in terms of their growth, in terms of, their growth in, in revenue or size?
Yes, we do. So we look at number of organisations, we look at number of contracts, and we look at dollar, but we also look at outcomes for young people as well. So we look for placement stability, placement breakdown. We look at and measure ourselves on the Aboriginal placement principles and how well we're doing.
Right. Okay, Hassan is asking another good question. So once contract were laid with the Aboriginal suppliers, what did the procurement team at the department had to do differently to manage the relationships and the contract with those entities compared to your traditional supply base?
Yeah,
you
that's
mentioned
a great
storytelling.
Question.
Yeah, the storytelling being a big component. Was
Yeah.
there anything else that?
Yeah, it's a really good question. So we do have one provider that is, large, long-standing, established. So we have a regular routine of catching up with them like any of our other providers. But for our new providers, we did learn that we did need to lean in and support some more in those early days within a contract. So it was really a two-way street, that they were really wanting to hear feedback as well. So that's one advice that I would definitely give is really early dialogue and support. So often government has a lot of bureaucratic terminology and bureaucratic ways of doing things, which are just an unnecessary part of our way that we have to do business, as government generally. And it's not just our new Aboriginal entrants that struggle with this. We've also found that our new disability providers have also had challenges with how do you interface with government. And we've definitely been very deliberate in early stages of contracts to really have large amounts of dialogue and give feedback early, and they can give us feedback and say, we're not understanding, you know, what we would do in this situation. Our young people are complex. There's complex issues that come up all the time. And I have to acknowledge, I guess, my practice partners again in this, because they definitely support us in supporting organisations in how to care for young people on a daily basis, and some of the complexities that some new entrants into the market may have. So we definitely have done for far more engagement and in support in this area, but we've reaped the rewards of that.
Brilliant. Questions keep coming through fast and thick, which is an awesome sign. People wanting to know more. Caroline is asking, have you found you needed to factor capacity building for Aboriginal community control organisation into the funding or service agreement, or has it been required and not been required?
Yeah, it definitely is required. I remember on my journey when I first started this, I did meet with a well-established ACCO from Victoria who was doing amazing work. They were really impressive organisation, and I asked them about their journey and how they got to where they were and the level of maturity. And basically they said the government gave us one grant of $1 million, and that started us on the journey. And that really resonated with me, that was going to need to be, if we were truly going to grow Aboriginal organisations, we would have to give some form of seed funding for new providers in order to support them to start that journey. And so we were very deliberate in telling the market that we were going to do that I was going to be proactive, and that we were going to provide seed funding for new providers to start up and establish themselves. And I'm really pleased to say that I absolutely got the backing of our government to do that. I got the backing of Treasury and Finance, which you're never sure with your departments of Treasury and Finance whether they're going to support you when you say that you're going to do these things. But I am pleased to say that I did receive that backing when I did recommend that as an approach to market, which was great. It's
very, very encouraging that the government is looking at that issue in such a manner. Yeah. Chris is asking, how do you actually classify a business being Aboriginal? I don't know whether the ACC will have a sort of slightly different, but is it aligned with the supply chain definition, looking at, you know, percentage ownership of the organisation?
Yes, it is. Yeah, so the Office of Industry Advocate are the ones that control that definition, and it does come down to Aboriginal ownership.
Okay, thank you. So another question from Deirdre, which is one we often get asked, and I think to a degree there's part of it that's become a bit of a bias on the fact that, you know, when you looking at sourcing more diversely, it's either going to cost you more and you need to invest more resources. So I'd like to sort of like split the question. Was that the case? And if so, how do you manage to get the buy-in? You just touched on that, but if you can also make some comments maybe on,
that's a great question actually, because we did struggle with that now, because some of the services that we purchased, we actually set the price. And we did go on quite a long journey around how we were going to do that in a fair and equitable manner. And in a previous life, I worked in acute hospitals and was part of the national setting of the national efficient price for hospitals around the country with the Commonwealth. And as part of that work, there was the establishment of rural and remote loadings, which recognises, because South Australia, the way it's geographically laid out, does create challenges and does change the cost of service delivery for services. And also what Health also acknowledge and have huge amounts of information that actually says that the delivery of services to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders does also have additional cost imposts. So we were quite deliberate in our price setting that we did pick up the health loadings. Because I was very familiar with all the work that had gone on in health across the country, and it was based on, I guess, large volumes of data over long periods of time, benchmarked extensively. So we did pick up the health loadings and weightings and applied them internally to our own services. That was the best that I could find at the time in terms of something that was robust, that I could convince the government there was that cost differential. So for our Aboriginal services, so for anyone who's caring for an Aboriginal young person in a family-based placement, we offer a 4% loading. So the loading comes based on geography and whether the child is Aboriginal or non-Aboriginal rather than the organisation. So everyone gets a fair price. So I do want to be really clear that all of our Aboriginal organisations that have won work with us have won on merit. Like we haven't, this has not been a token exercise. That they absolutely, we've got very stringent standards that you have to meet. We've got licensing requirements. There's all sorts of quality and safety standards. If you're going to care for a young person, it is a complex thing to do. And we needed to make sure that these organisations were meeting those standards and up to those levels is a very important part of what we do. Yeah, so it really, the money follows the child and the child's complexity and the location rather than the organisation, sort of that everyone is, other than that, everyone gets the same price.
Thanks, Jennifer. Just to follow on, and I don't know if you care to comment, this is sort of like the flip side. You made a remark before about, reaping the benefit of the engagement with those organisations. So again, to sort of like break in favour of this type of engagement with diverse supplier, did you see any particular difference in terms of the reward or the level of effort and commitment from those organisations to wanting to service the department in a way that went well beyond what probably other suppliers would normally do?
Yeah, I think it was definitely for us, often in life it's all about timing, isn't it? And I think it was definitely a case of preparation meets opportunity, that there was organisations that were desperately wanting to engage and desperately wanting to do work and wanted better outcomes for their communities, that they weren't happy with the way services were being delivered for Aboriginal young people, and we just needed to create the opportunity. So it's, I think, it's funny when you reflect back that there was, sometimes, there's these artificial barriers, whether they're real or perceived, but part of what we've tried to do is sort of break down some of those barriers on both sides of the fence. And I think that this is still the start of the journey for us. I still think we've got, a long way to go, and our organisations still have some maturing that they need to do, particularly some of the new ones. But and that was a learning that I learned from interstate with our interstate counterparts, is you just have to start that journey and be willing to keep coming back to the table and keep that open dialogue.
Awesome. In terms of, you've set yourself some target, smashed them, you increased them, and you continue on that journey. What helped maintain the momentum to keep going, keep increasing the target, keep aiming higher?
I think it was, I guess it's multi-pronged. It's definitely the commitment from the sector, that they, we're continuing to have young people come into care. The complexity of those young people is continuing to increase, and they are continuing to deliver good services. So that definitely helps. It's also a commitment from the organisation and the executive team in particular more broadly. The CE and the Deputy CE of Child Protection are really passionate people about this, and I've had support. I've had absolute support there. I've had support from our Minister, from Cabinet more broadly, Our Premier is, he has Aboriginal affairs in his portfolio, so he's particularly passionate about this work as well. So I guess it's that commitment across the board is what makes this sort of stuff work.
So I'd like to find one question for me, which brings us sort of like back to where we started, the problem statement. You mentioned that, the whole journey started looking at, an overrepresentation of Aboriginal kids in the system, Torres Strait Islander kids in the system. Have you to date seen a reduction in that percentage, which I think you mentioned it was about a third? Have you seen a decrease in the representation of those kids in the community?
No, we haven't, sadly. So that representation still is consistent. I guess the reality for us is that young people coming into care is a reflection of what's going on in our society. And I guess the frequent risk factors for families are still drug and alcohol, domestic violence and mental health issues. They're the layers of complexity, and for lots of our families, they're experiencing all of those vulnerabilities. Obviously, we do worry about COVID. There's been a lot in the media, and that we, hope that, some of the services that government are procuring is preventative measures. That happens in another government department, doesn't happen in child protection. And, we're really hopeful that some of those preventative measures will help support families dealing with those complexities, and we won't have the need to bring kids into care.
Thanks, Jennifer. This has been such an amazing session. We've gone through such a variety of aspects of of the engagement, from the motivation to the methodologies and the outcomes. Would you care to make like a final comment, give people in attendance an advice on what to do, where to start on that journey?
Yeah, I would also like to acknowledge my counterparts interstate. When I first started on this journey, I knew about procurement, but I didn't know about this sector, and I knew that there was potentially some issues for new players that I needed to take into consideration. So I am always happy to share things that I'm doing, and I was so grateful for the sharing that occurred when I arrived in the organisation. That I did a trip along the eastern seaboard when I first arrived, and I was overwhelmed by the fantastic response. And sometimes it's sharing what you shouldn't do. Some of my interstate counterparts said, "Don't do this." We tried it, and it was terrible. So it's about definitely about sharing. I think it's about getting to know the sector as well. Like I have met some absolutely impressive people on this journey that are just phenomenal. So I really encourage people to get to know your ACOs. There's some amazing individuals with amazing stories around their own careers and journeys and how they got to where they are. Really innovative people, very entrepreneurial in their approaches. So I guess it's really just starting and leaning in and starting that dialogue.
That's brilliant. Thanks, Jennifer. And very last questions. You are the winner of the Supplier Diversity Award at the CIPS Supply Management. Any advice on people that are thinking about submitting for that particular project?
Yeah, well, this is I'm a first-time entrant to this, so it was a bit of a different journey for us as well. And the reason why we entered was really to acknowledge the work of the team. This has been a long journey, and the team have done an amazing amount of really hard work, and I wanted them to have that recognition for the work that they had done, and also for the sector and the organisation more broadly, including Tracy Rigney from our Aboriginal practice area, that that was part of our wanting to submit. I think for us, we were really clear about our vision. We were really clear about what we wanted to do. We didn't always have all the detail, but you will learn and you'll problem solve along the way. And I think the other thing for us is like quantify, but that ability to quantify your value. That we were quite deliberate. I think sometimes putting a hard, cold number on the table does worry people at times. That for us, that was a really important part of actually really setting those targets and continuing to do so. I think that really sharpens your focus when when you're going after a particular expend level.
That's brilliant.
But I do encourage people to enter.
Awesome. Thanks, Jennifer. And totally agree. They say having a clear vision is halfway to success. So congratulations again. What an achievement. And now that I've known a lot more about the project, really hats off to you and your entire team and organization for the outstanding work that you continue to do. So congratulations once again. I'd like to thank you on behalf of CIPS on making yourself available to share some of those insights with us and with our community. And I'd like to thank our attendees as well. Before we wrap up, we just want to encourage you to look at some of the upcoming webinars that we have. Again, continuing on the line of sharing awesome examples of procurement success. We have an outstanding procurement transformation story from Watercare, New Zealand, with Stuart Bird and Anna Morgridge on the 15th of October. This is 12 p.m. Australian Eastern Daylight Saving, which is 2 p.m. in New Zealand. And then on the following week, another example of public organisation delivering some amazing value. And we have slightly different model here. It's the University Procurement Hub. So a number of universities coming together with Tony Wilson, who's the chair of that committee, presenting, and Simone Everington. This is on the 21st of October, same time. So thank you once again for all those in attendance. Thank you again to Jennifer and Crystal as well, who's been extremely helpful. And thank you all in attendance. Until next time, I hope you enjoy the rest of your Tuesday and the rest of your week. Thank you very much and goodbye.